Hi, everyone. Welcome to our third webinar of 2019. I'm Michelle, the Chief of Staff of BookPal, a bookseller that focuses on inspiring individuals and organizations to connect, learn, and grow through new ideas. Today, I'm here with Dr. Paul Napper and Dr. Anthony Rayo, authors of The Power of Agency, to talk about a very important and highly relevant topic in today's world. Paul leads a management psychology and executive coaching consultancy in Boston, with a client list including Fortune 500 companies, financial firms, nonprofit organizations, universities, and startups. He earned his doctorate in psychology from William James College in Boston and held an academic appointment and advanced fellowship position at the Harvard Medical School. Tony is a cognitive behavioral psychologist and holds a PhD in psychology from Vanderbilt University. He maintains a clinical practice, consults, and speaks nationally. For over 20 years, he was a psychologist at Boston Children's Hospital and an instructor at Harvard Medical School. So to begin, Paul and Tony will share a brief presentation on their new book, The Power of Agency, and then we'll have a little discussion. So feel free to submit any questions that you have for Paul and Tony at any time during the webinar. And same as always, we'll be sending out the webinar recording to all attendees next week. All right, I'll let you guys go ahead and get started.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. So we're going to start today with these three simple premises. One is we're all living in an age of overwhelm. Many people feel they're on treadmills and they're stuck and they're not exactly living lives that they most want to live. What overwhelm is it's essentially a breakdown in the capacity to adapt to a stress. A stressor, it's anything that is in your life situation that you need to address or cope with. And agency relates directly to this. Agency is all about how we learn and adapt to the environment around us and take charge of that.
So let me show you something. Everybody asks us, so why are we so overwhelmed? Take a look at this chart. You know, I describe this as one of the most important graphics that you may have never seen. What you're looking at are decades from 1930 to 2010, and researchers have been tracking measures of anxiety. They call it hypomania. You may see that in the lower part of the screen, but that's just a sort of a fancy word for all different types of anxiety, using really, really sound statistical measurements. They've been tracking it in young adults mostly, some younger people more recently, college and high school age. And when you look at these decades, you can see starting around 1938, it was on the low side, and then it started to climb in the 50s and 60s. And anxiety in the United States has been climbing steadily. It's continuing to climb. This graph only goes to about 2010. And those differences between decades, as small as they may seem to you on this screen, are dramatic if you're talking about that length of time. So somewhere around 1950, I think that's when a lot of people started to get more mobile in terms of cars and highway systems. So a lot of faster paced living started. People went out to the suburbs, more manufacturing, but we really see it kick in when we get to the true part of the information age with digital devices. You know, handhelds and internet and more global and social media kinds of platforms. That's where it really, really got highly, highly significant. You know, keep in mind that if you're looking at these as scaled scores, if you will, of large groups, these are large groups of people, several thousands in these samples, they should probably be somewhere in the 50, 55 range to be sort of what we would say non-clinical. What does that tell you? It tells you that everybody in the country has inched up and that we're all feeling unbelievable amounts of anxiety.
So the problem is we're in a race to adapt. And you know, this is both good and bad because there's opportunities to learn and grow and develop through this challenge to adapt that we all face. But what happens is many of us get overextended. Sometimes this happens more just situationally, occasionally, but for most of us, we feel overextended a lot of the time. What ends up happening is it produces the next bullet point on this slide is we're not really reflecting enough on our situation, on where we find ourselves. What this can lead to is making poor decisions. We basically, in feeling overextended, in feeling overwhelmed and anxious, we're distracted from what matters most. And that leads back to what we talked about earlier, feeling like you're on a treadmill. You know, some people have described it as in some ways feeling like they're on the road to nowhere. They're not sure where they're going. And so this is the problem. So the good news is there's actually a solution to this problem. And we're going to talk about that.
So along the way of interviewing lots of people across the country and delving deep into our, mutual pools of clients and folks we've worked with over, 2 to 3 plus decades, we found something that to us was an epiphany, and we think it's unbelievably powerful. So we're going to share it with you now. Look, we all know that we have high rates of anxiety. I just showed you that graph, right? And there are these moments where it tips over, and you know what that feels like when you're overwhelmed. It's like you can't think straight, feel really agitated. It might affect your sleep. You've got high levels of adrenaline and cortisol, these stress hormones in your body. What we found, in fact, is that the higher amount of anxiety and overwhelm and stress that you were under, it was sort of squishing down, tamping down your confidence level. But when confidence was increased through all different types of ways, it might be a simple change of a few behaviors, it might be in some new ways of thinking, we found in clients and people we interviewed across the country, and in fact, it was able to reduce anxiety and overwhelm. We saw this as this sort of seesaw effect that we believe really is at the heart of agency.
So where confidence comes from, essentially, you boil it all down, is confidence comes from making good choices that are within our control to make. So when I am struggling with something and I can't figure it out for a long period of time, my confidence decreases. When I try to resolve something that's not really within my control to resolve, that reduces my confidence. So in many respects, knowing what you have the control to do, and then taking charge of your decision-making process to help you make a good choice. These are the kinds of things that build confidence. So as Tony just said, it all comes down to certain ways of behaving and thinking, which are teachable, and which we cover in our book. So this slide is in reference to the fact that more than ever today, we are all free agents in our lives. Our parents' generation and the generation prior to that, things were a bit more stable and structured. People sometimes worked in jobs for their entire careers. They worked for one company for their entire careers. That doesn't happen anymore. In many respects, we're all like free agents in our lives. Similar to sports stars who don't have a contract, right? They have to advocate for themselves. What this means is we need to act as an agent for ourselves. We need to be an effective agent for ourselves. So how do we do that? We need to have a framework. And we cover that in the book. And this is really just as simple as where am I going? Where do I want to take myself? What are my own unique strengths and weaknesses? What do I need to develop more in myself? How can I take greater ownership of my own kind of development? And how can I become able to make better decisions for myself to exercise my agency?
When you think about a lot of companies, they follow business models. They have frameworks. We can do it for ourselves as well. Ned Hallowell, New York Times bestselling author, written a lot of books. Driven to Distraction, one of his most famous. He read our book early, and I just love this quote he sent to us. He thought of agency this way: as running your life as opposed to letting your life run you.
So what is agency? we get this question a lot. Agency is a concept that has been discussed and looked at and thought about within psychology, within philosophy, and within sociology primarily. And it's the capacity that each of us has as a human being to exert power for ourselves, to exert our free will, to make independent, creative decisions about where we want to take our lives. It turns out that to be an effective agent for yourself, you need to get your body, your mind, and your emotions in balance. Because when those things are in better balance, you're more able to think clearly and advocate for yourself. So our book is largely about how do you do that? How do you get yourself in greater balance so that you then can be a more effective agent for yourself? So essentially, agency is how you show up in your life. It's what your state of mind is. It's your level of awareness, both of yourself and of the world around you and the specific situation that you find yourself in. It has to do with your level of confidence and how grounded you are. And one of the key things about agency is your openness to learning. So when you have not just a greater openness, but also you actively position yourself to learn. This is a really crucial thing because, again, if we are on a race to adapt, learning becomes one of the most critical things that helps us all to better adapt to the situations we find ourselves in. So all of these things, in terms of how you show up in your life, feed into your capacity to make good decisions for yourself and to act in positive ways.
And you are the deliverable. Yeah, it's you. You're going to invest in yourself. This is the best news. It isn't really hard to learn, and in fact, we are all born with it programmed in us. We all have the human skills, the capacities, the capabilities in how we think, and our ability to control ourselves, to be aware of ourselves, to be aware of the environment in which we live and the space in which we inhabit. We cover this in the book mostly through stories. We pepper it with some research, but for the most part, we wanted to hand people sort of a simple guide so that they could look at what we learned to be 7 principles, that promoted these things we're talking about today. Now, we'll say the beautiful thing about it, because I really wanted to stress that it is something really wonderful, is when you have agency, people notice it. You look good on the outside. You've seen people who have that air of confidence that's natural. It's not fake. They just sort of work and glide through the world, in a better way. And when you're in that space, when you have agency, you feel good on the outside. Just feel above, if you will, of the tension and the stress, and you're meeting your goals. Really, really important, and we're gonna come back to this a lot. We say it in the book a lot. At the end of the day, it's what's going to allow you to create a life on your own terms. This is your life, so it's about you taking charge and you creating it. And again, as Paul said, these are about 3 ways that we behave and 4 ways that we think. Those are, in a nutshell, which we'll talk about in a minute, the 7 practices.
So as Tony was saying, the beautiful thing about agency is that it feels really good when we exercise it. And one thing that sometimes is helpful in describing what agency is, when people have a hard time kind of defining it, is to think about the movies we go to see. And when we go see a movie, what are we usually watching? Most every movie that you'll see shows a human being exercising agency in some way, shape, or form. It could be, Julia Roberts taking on, a large company that's polluting the environment. It can be, it can be many things. Obviously, the Marvel comic series are about, superhumans, right? I mean, agency on steroids. But when we go to the movies, we are looking at human beings who are expressing their human powers. They're using all their faculties to exert some power on the environment that they live in. So when it comes to agency, it's all about expressing it, and you express it through how you behave and how you think. So there's 7 principles to agency, which Tony's going to describe for you, and we boiled this all down to the most essential core principles that facilitate greater agency.
That we learned, well, frankly, from you, from people that we worked with over the years, people that we interviewed across the country. So those are the acronyms for them, and I'll unlock them so you can see the names that we've given them. In the book, each is just a separate chapter, using stories and relevant new research that's important for you to know, sort of walks you through each of them. We decided to put it on this sort of clock or pinwheel kind of look, sort of starting at 1 o'clock, if you will, is control stimuli. Setting it up this way because they work really nice together. You don't have to do them all at the same time. You may not be good at one or the other. You may be a natural at a few. We want people to feel very relaxed, entering into these and adapting them and learning how to get better and practicing them every day. The 3 that are on the right, control stimuli, associate selectively, and move, are what we call more behavioral. We've been talking about that a little bit, and they're a little bit easier to adopt and to work on and understand. The 4 on the other side are more what we call cognitive. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on 2 that we think are really highly relevant to people, particularly in the work environment, but all of them are. One is control stimuli, the other is position yourself as a learner.
So control stimuli, as Tony mentioned, is the first principle actually in our book, and this is for a very important reason. It comes first for a very important reason, and that's because agency begins with what you let into your head. So if you're letting a lot of extraneous, garbage into your mind, the chances are you're not going to have the clearest thinking and the best decision making. So whether you're in a work environment or in your personal life, it's useful to maintain a clear head. So the reason for this is also, to increase your mental bandwidth, which is your capacity to reflect and make good decisions. Deborah, a client of mine, from about a year or 2 back, she had an interesting, she's a manager, she's a pretty senior level marketing person for a large Fortune 200 company. And I asked her specifically about how does she manage all the information coming her way. Because I know, marketing has certainly a quantitative dimension where there's a lot of data. There's also, lots of qualitative information that comes into the mix, and she's got to make important decisions as a senior marketing person. And one of the things she does is she talks with her team about establishing certain rules of engagement about stimulation. And when I say stimulation, in this case, I mean raw data. And what Deborah says to her direct reports is she says, I want you to pre-filter all raw information. I don't want raw data dumps. I want you to tell me what you think something means, why it's significant. You can give me some data points as to how you arrived at that place, but tell me what you think it all adds up to. Don't just deliver the data to me and have me have to then sort through it to figure it out. So in Deborah's case, as a manager, This helps her to keep a clear head, and it increases her mental bandwidth to make the kind of decisions she needs to make. And if you're not a manager, if you report to a manager, this is something you can try on as well, which is to say, when you are managing up to your manager, bring to that person your thoughts on something. Try experimenting with not delivering, doing a raw data dump with that manager, but presenting your thoughts on something, sharing how you arrived at your position, what data points you used, and see if that doesn't help smooth the way.
And if you're able to see in the book at some point, at the end of each chapter, we have these toolkit items. There's 2 here, and I'll show you what they look like in the book, actually. We end the chapter. That's actually the end on the left side. It says your agency toolkit. That's the end of the control stimuli chapter that we were just referencing, or Paul was talking about. You see sort of 4 up from there, embrace boredom. That's one of the ones I was just mentioning on the other slide. People are very easily bored today because we're used to so much stimulation so quick getting into our heads, particularly from digital devices, that a lot of people sort of rob themselves as opportunities to sort of let their mind be clear. So we talk in the book of various tools, techniques, and strategies for people to sort of clear their mind so that some more creative and more deeper thinking can happen. And a few up from that is another nice one that I particularly like, which is take notes by hand. It's this whole idea about going more analog with, say, a pen or pencil and some paper. A lot of people are carrying these really nice small, notebooks with them, moleskin or leather bound, or just things that have a nice color, and they're jotting down notes as they go. Apparently, this holding on to the pencil and having that multi-sensory feel and moving it around, and it slows the thinking down. Well, it turns out some of the research studies are showing that in fact people remember more and do deeper thinking if they on occasion go analog. And then you'll see that we then start on the right side each chapter with a clear definition as you go into the next principle.
So the second and last principle we're going to cover today is called position yourself as a learner. And as I mentioned earlier, your capacity to learn is really essential today. It's one of the key things that will help you to best adapt to the situation you're in, and to help you to create the life you want to create for yourself. So it starts with learning how you learn best. And in the book we cover this topic of all the different ways that human beings learn, and it helps to know how you learn best. Because you can leverage that to increase your learning. Strengthening your curiosity is really important. Learning how to ask good questions is incredibly important in our environment today. So with this principle, position yourself as a learner, it's all about very actively positioning yourself to learn in your life, in your work, and in your personal life. Agency is all about being more active as opposed to passive. And so the language here, position yourself as a learner, is meant to signal that this is something you actively need to do. So just to get back to Deborah for one second, we talked about how she controls stimuli, how she tries to simplify things to help her be more effective in her job. What she also does is she positions herself as a learner. And how she does this is, she asks her team and others around her to bring to her their thoughts, to think something through in advance, to present, their ideas, and she'll then ask questions, and they'll engage in a discussion about that. But at the same time she's controlling stimuli as a manager, she's also positioning herself as a learner with the people around her. So the bottom line with this principle, position self as learner, is it will help you to develop all of your human skills, which will help you also to remain relevant in the age of artificial intelligence. This is obviously a big thing on people's mind. Will I be relevant in 5 years and 10 years? There will always be a role for human decision making, for human judgment, and developing your capacities with respect to that will enable you to always be relevant.
So there are, again, we've just covered 2 of them, but there are 7 principles that really do work nicely together. You know, and Paul and I had based this from combining, he works in the consulting space, I work in more the clinical space. And once we had distilled down some of these trends we were seeing, because in both of our work we were noticing that more and more of our clients were sort of having some problems and were a little bit stressed, and we were noticing that some of them were actually doing very well, despite the fact that we knew that there were rising tides of anxiety and stress going on in the country. So that got us on this mission. It's been about a 5-year project. And once we identified the 7 practices, we went ahead and we thought, well, we should try to measure these. So we spent some time with a Boston University researcher. And in the book, we have the agency practices inventory, the API. And it's a nice way people can take this inventory very quickly. It'll plot you on where you are on the 7 practices. So you can sort of get a sense of, like, if I leap into these chapters, sort of like what I may need a little bit more work on. It's also a really good way to sort of get an understanding of what these practices are about. If you go on powerofagency.com, you can take the first one, control stimuli, which we talked about, for free. And it will score it for you, and it'll give you some feedback. So you can go and do that a little bit later, sort of see where you are on control stimuli. I think this is yours, Paul.
Yeah, so essentially, where do you start? You know, we've presented a lot of information today, and hopefully we haven't overwhelmed you.
Yeah.
But where do you start? Where we suggest you start is take inventory of yourself. You know, you can use our inventory that we developed on the agency principles, but more broadly, there's ways to just ask yourself the question: where do I stand, and particularly at work? What is my professional skill set? What I mean by that is, you know, what are some of your relevant skills, more concrete professional skills? Do I need to learn some new skills? And then assess your managerial skill set, which is, how well do I manage myself? How well do I manage a process or a project? Or if I manage people, how well do I manage other people? How could I be better? You know, what's most difficult for me? And then thirdly, and this is probably one of the most important things, is where does my attention tend to go most often? Does it go to the right places? Does it help me? Do I get, you know, sidetracked in blind alleys a lot of the time? Do I get, you know, do I let somebody else, or do I let events take control and hijack my attention? So in any case, the second area here is, it's important to take strategic investments, make strategic investments in yourself. And lastly, how do you manage overwhelm in your life? So looking ahead, in terms of your overall life, what really is most crucial is, how do you make the best decisions for yourself? Because, as we say in the book, the life that you create is really the sum total of all the decisions you make over the course of your life.
And our last principle is deliberate then act, which really focuses on the decision-making process.
That's right, and our book really does a deep dive on decision making, since this is such a crucial thing for all of us. As you see from this XY axis graph, you know, we have agency in the top right quadrant, which relates to exercising sound judgment and being able to move into confident action. That's the desire for all of us, that more often than not, we find ourselves in that quadrant, right? If we're in the bottom right quadrant, you know, which one of my colleagues laughingly describes as, you know, I'm often wrong, but I'm never in doubt. You know, you feel confident in taking action, but your decision making is not very high quality. So you're not taking the right actions. So you can see from this XY axis chart that, you know, many of us at our worst can end up in the bottom left quadrant, which is disorganized and distracted. And the environment we live in today has lots and lots of things that can distract us.
It puts us right into that quadrant, actually.
So so in any case, I think final thoughts. You want to take that?
Yeah,
Tony?
just wanted to highlight that you are the deliverable. It's one of my favorite lines. And Paul, you came up with that. If you think about it, like, you've got to invest in yourself. Like, we do work really hard, and we work for other people, and sometimes we make products for other people, or we sell things. But at the end of the day, you're the one who's the most valuable. And the good news is you have what it takes. It's already inside of you. You have all of the mental and cognitive and behavioral skill sets to be able to develop your agency. So again, our hope for you is we want you to unlock your full potential, put yourself on paths of your choosing. Ultimately, you want to have an authentic life, a more meaningful life. Go to our website, powerofagency.com. You can learn more. Also, we're really excited about a podcast, Better at Everything with Macmillan, our publisher. And I think that 2 of 5 of them have now been put up online, and you can go check it out. It's part of a series called Better at Everything, and we are going to be season 2.
That's right.
Yeah, which is going to be great. And just real quickly, as we are about to take some questions, some social media if you want. Facebook, we have a lot of great active users there, a lot of information there. And you can follow Paul and I on Twitter. We're growing it, and we'd love for you to be a part of how we move forward with all that.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. That was a really great insight into sort of the overall explanation of what agency is and what you touch on in the book. And I think there's so much more that the book goes into. So I highly recommend everybody check it out. But so we're going to kick off the questions and answers. And before we get started, I just want to say that when I picked up your book and I started reading, I got to page 5 on the introduction, where it talks about the pace of life has accelerated beyond what we can adapt to. We're in a constant buzz of anxiety and worry about getting everything done that we're supposed to. So this creates a negative feedback loop, and we have more anxiety, and then we have anxiety about all the things we're not doing, and it just piles on and piles on. And I was like, oh my gosh, I know exactly what this feels like. So from the second I got to that page, I was like, okay, I need to read this book. This is great. So I wanted to kick it off with asking, you have researched, most cutting edge science in fields of positive psychology, cognitive behavioral therapy, intuitiveness, et cetera. And, at what point in your research did you realize that agency was at the core of long-term success and happiness? Was it sort of an aha moment, or did it just evolve gradually?
I mean, I can tell you that agency came about after some frustration, at least for me. We've been using, as all of us do in these practicing fields of consulting and clinical, grit and mindfulness and lots of, a mindset, a lot of really useful types of strategies and techniques, but we felt that we were just sort of missing something bigger. Yeah.
Well, we started framing the problems with overwhelm and anxiety that so many of us feel, connecting that to the struggle to adapt, that in some ways, why people experience overwhelm and why as a society we're so anxious is we're all struggling to adapt. And agency is the thing that allows us to take charge of ourselves and to adapt to best adapt to the situations we find ourselves in. So we got to agency primarily through that, and then through our clients too, and seeing which of our clients seemed to be doing a lot better. What is it that they were doing that was different? And that took a lot of time puzzling through that to try to distill down what are these people doing that seemingly is helping them to be a bit more inoculated to a lot of this anxiety and overwhelm. And so that helped us as well to kind of use as a model. And it became obvious that they had higher levels of agency. And so really that's a great first question.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that reading this book was the first time I was exposed to this concept of agency, but, instantly it makes sense. It's very logical. And when you read about all of the ways in which we can take control over our agency, it's very straightforward, but it's something that sometimes I think needs to be explicitly told to someone so that they can figure out what to do about it. So that's why I think that your message is so powerful.
Well,
Go ahead.
one other thing, Michelle, I'd like to add to that is, one core kind of finding is that, human beings are animals, right? We actually are animals, and we are herd animals. We're social creatures, but what that also means is we're herd animals. So like horses, like wild horses who get spooked and start all running because one horse gets scared and sees something or hears something. So being herd animals and running with the herd is sort of the opposite of exercising agency. Agency really is about taking independent action. It's about thinking a bit more independently. And so what we realized is, if we're all caught up in this anxiety contagion, which the chart Tony showed you demonstrates, how do we step outside of that? And that involves not following the herd.
Yeah. Well, so that actually, speaking of stepping outside of that and sort of taking your own agency, we got a question from Martin, who said, I'm so busy, there are so many things competing for my time. How do I make sure I take time for myself? It seems impossible some weeks.
I can tell you, I deal with this every day. I mean, I do tend to see children and teens and young adults, but I have to work with their parents, so families are always front and center. And this has been a growing problem. And at the core, I'm a behavioral psychologist, so I tell them, look, you just absolutely take one thing and just introduce it a day, and it's really simple. And then what you do is you're carving out a little bit of space, and your brain adjusts. The reason people have a hard time putting good things in their lives, taking breaks, is that their brain keeps signaling them that you can't do that. That's not good. That's not what you normally do. It could get worse. And so we just find that people just change a habit in tiny ways, but choose one and stick to it. Give it a couple of days in a row, and you can change. You can drop one thing that you don't really need to do and realize that you can live without it, and you can introduce something else that feels more pleasant. But going back to one of the things we talked about, this is perhaps for you, Martin, is just this idea that we've got to be okay with low stimulation. We've got to not just control stimulation, but be okay with our own thoughts, having space between the stimulation that we expose ourselves to, so we don't feel suddenly bored and then go on to the next thing.
And one point I'll make is just, many of our clients who experience a lot of overwhelm, are sometimes just trying to do too much, and they're multitasking way too much. We really recommend in the control stimuli chapter, try to do monotasking as much as possible. We actually are not as good as we think we are when we're multitasking. Everything is kind of sub-optimized. So that's, one thing at a time, and also try to be more realistic about, what your objectives are. Don't try to cram too much into a too small space, because that's a recipe for overwhelm.
And I'll also say that if you're looking around and you see everybody else, to go back to your point about a herd mentality, everybody else seems so busy, it's really hard to institute some new changes in your life, because you suddenly compare yourself to everyone, and then you just give up. Don't do that. Again, this is about stepping outside.
Well, and one other principle we didn't talk about today, and I'm not going to go into depth on, is associate selectively, which means, also pay attention if you find yourself around people who are highly anxious, that actually is contagious. So if you find yourself around people who seem very worried and anxious and overwhelmed a lot, that will rub off on you. So sometimes it's as simple as just removing yourself from the company of some of those people can really have an additive benefit.
Yeah, I mean, even for me, thinking about, what I've read from the book, I think the first two principles of controlling your stimuli and associating selectively can really help you to declutter a lot of what you have going on in your life. And really, when you take time for yourself, it makes you more productive in other areas. So you have to prioritize that in addition to all of the things that are, that you're being pulled into. So I think that's really important for de-stressing a little bit when you're crazy busy.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And we tried very hard in this book with the principles we developed. We're not trying to add more things to people's to-do lists. In fact, we're really kind of trying to take things away from, so you're not doing more. Because the one issue we had with a lot of the time management stuff is that you can manage your time, and we can all get better at managing our time for sure. But if you're trying to take on too much, that's a fundamental problem. And I think in our culture, the wider culture is we're looking around and for models and seeing other people who tend to take on too much, and we're modeling ourselves after those people.
Yeah. So we have another question that came from our listener, Cassie. How do you balance having agency with being in situations where almost all of it is out of your control? So for example, for new college graduates, dealing with student debt, high cost of living, and challenge finding entry-level positions with livable wages.
That's a great question, and those are enormous challenges.
Yeah.
And I think what I would suggest is trying to take those things on one at a time. Not trying to take them on all at once, but trying also to figure out, okay, what is my top priority here? Is it getting a job in my chosen field? Do I know what I really want to do most? And how, if you do, you're ahead of the game there, because then you can start to figure out, okay, so how do I get there? How do I achieve that? But I think taking one thing at a time is really important. I think learning from other people. I think I would say position self as learner could be a valuable principle to use too. How are other people handling all this? Are there some people who are doing particularly well with trying to manage these things and get start a life and launch a career in the wake of all of these potential obstacles?
Now, I was thinking too that one of our principles, manage emotions and beliefs. Cassie, for you, just to we have a technique, basically pull back the lens, step back and look at the big picture here and sort of slow this whole process down a little bit. There may be some terrific advantages that will challenge you to figure some things out that down the road, looking back, you're going to be really excited. You just didn't have something right then and there to maybe just leap into. We ask people to make sure that they're taking care of their bodies and they're moving and they're resting, so that all of their psychological and health well-being is optimal. But getting control is sort of the anxiety that we all feel, particularly in this type of economy, is only going to decrease your chances of making good decisions when it's time to then deliberate and finally act. And another one that we really rely heavily on and talk about with our clients is check your intuition, which is carving out more space and time to slow your life down, where you can meditate, you can use mindfulness, you can go for a run, you can sort of like just change the screen in your head, but then allow your deeper thinking to sort of give you some answers. Using your intuition can be a really wonderful guide, a sort of a tap into the inner wiser parts of yourself. And again, this whole thing is about taking control and maybe not following the trends. And it may be that that you're going to turn out to be somebody who's able to do that.
Yeah, no, I think we live in a world of competing demands, and I think people just getting started in their lives find this to be really quite daunting, because it feels if on an emotional level, it does feel like you don't have much control over things. And I think reflecting more on the situation you find yourself in, and as Tony suggested, perhaps using some intuition as well. Oftentimes you'll find that you have a few more opportunities to control things and to make choices than you realized. So I'd say definitely continue to reflect on that.
Yeah, I was going to say these are real and human concerns, and very honest of Cassie to raise those.
Yeah, thanks, guys. So I had another question for you. In the workplace in America, which is, I believe, rated the country with the highest rate of anxiety in the world, um, there's this unspoken understanding that we're not supposed to get emotional or bring our personal stresses to work, but the reality is that's kind of impossible. So my question to you is, how can managers be more supportive of employees that are suffering from stress, overwhelm, and anxiety while still enforcing a strong work ethic?
I mean, I think it's absolute health to begin to allow dialogue about the fact that we are emotional creatures. In fact, we're mostly emotional. We're actually not great at being logical, as it turns out. We cover that in the book somewhat. And that if we're in a work environment, we have to have openness, and we have to have structure, and that's a lot of how we learn from each other. I'll go on a gender limb here, if you will. Just more and more women have joined the workforce, and are bringing emotional intelligence into the workplace, and that can be it can create some friction, and I see that as a really, really healthy new movement.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and first of all, there is definitely a role that emotion should play in the workplace. Emotion is a data point that helps us to sometimes diagnose better what's going on here. If I'm feeling really uncomfortable about something, chances are it's for a good reason, and it may have direct bearing on the business situation that exists. So I think managers, the best managers, are aware of the fact that the people around them they work with will have emotions, and if someone is wrestling with a strong emotion, whether it's to do with work or whether it's to do with their personal life, it's best to ask them about it and say, what's up? How, it looks like you're having a tough day, or so we also recommend incorporating the third principle in our book, move. I know a manager who a woman, as it turns out, who she gets some of her team together, and they do squat competitions, in her office, and they laugh about it and joke about it. The movement is actually a really effective way to manage emotions. I think a lot of times people underestimate that, but a walking meeting, for example, can sometimes be a really beneficial thing to do for a manager.
Get outside.
For a manager to do, especially if a team member is struggling with something, struggling with a problem or with an emotion. Go on a walking meeting. Let's talk about this. Let's get out of the office. Let's meet in a different environment.
Let's use it effectively as a data point.
And also, in terms of the movement idea, it sounds like a joke to engage in squat competitions in your office for 20 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever it is. But honestly, it picks up the mood on the team. People laugh. It seems kind of silly. It also stimulates their brains. It increases circulation, and people think better and they feel better. So I think it's really, really a crucial thing. It's a great question. It's a really crucial thing for managers to be dialing in more and more to how people are feeling, because it increases engagement, it increases participation, and it makes work more fun, obviously. That's really important.
Yeah, I love all of those answers. I think that's really, you guys kind of hit the nail on the head. So, I wanted to wrap it up by saying first that as someone who has suffered throughout my life with a feeling of loss of agency, I just wanted to say that I love that you guys wrote this book and are kind of, contributing to normalizing mental health and recognizing that those who suffer from anxiety and overwhelm, there are forces that are affecting their emotions. It's not just them necessarily. And I love that you guys kind of talk about that in the beginning. There are factors that are shifting in the way that we live and our environment that are affecting our are feeling. So I just really appreciate that you guys wrote this amazing book. And I wanted to leave it with a final question of what would be your best advice for anyone struggling with depression and anxiety right now, but are afraid to reach out to get help?
I would go right back to the MOVE principle. All the latest research is demonstrating remarkable effects, particularly of vigorous movement, on the neurochemistry, particularly the serotonin and dopamine neurotransmitters that are often implicated in depression, anxiety, and attention. So I would immediately, if it's hard, you start taking a small walk. If it's maybe swimming is better for you, maybe you get a personal trainer, maybe you just go take a nice walk outdoors. We also know that the effects of natural light are essential, particularly in helping more seasonal affective disorder-like things. But so much of the stress and time that we spend indoors, particularly on screens, may be behind the higher rates of anxiety and depression that we are seeing. There's a lot of data on that. So you start with control stimuli and try to pare down, particularly social media, which has been linked to anxiety and depression. The longer you're on, the more that you do still feel maybe down because you've been comparing yourself to other people that seem to be doing better. The brain does those quick calculations. You're not even aware of it. And then move and really beginning to look at yourself as a really precious biological entity and taking care and respect of yourself.
And I'll just add one thing to that, which is our principle, associate selectively, which Michelle, you referred to a minute ago. We are social creatures, and we're embedded in a social environment. So if you're feeling depressed, if you're feeling anxious, think about who you surround yourself with, and think about how you can find your way to a person or to people who make you feel better about yourself,
right.
People who are supportive, people who will listen to you, people who have your best interest at heart. Honestly, it often only just takes one person.
Right.
If you have that person. The other thing is just, in some ways, trying to get outside of your own head and connecting with the community that you're a part of. This could be, your immediate neighborhood, it could be the building you live in, it could be your town, it could be, but engaging in some kind of activity where you become a member and participate and your involvement makes a difference. That can be enormously helpful for someone who's struggling with feeling depressed or anxious.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much for being here with us today. As a reminder, we will be sending out a recording of the webinar this week. Next week, sorry. You can visit our website at book-pal.com/power-of-agency to purchase this book for your organization, or you can always shoot me an email at michelle@book-pal.com to learn more. And you can visit the URL up on the slide to see our full list of upcoming chats for the rest of this year. Our next chat is April 4th with Laura Vanderkam, author of Juliet, School of Possibilities. We hope you enjoy the webinar, and thank you so much, Paul and Tony, for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Michelle.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.